Oh,
got it.
okay, there we go.
Okay, great. Well, so let me share my screen here. Just a second. I'm going to do the advanced, which gives me a portion of the screen to share. And this should work out pretty well. Okay, here we go. So as I said, my name is David Schalliol. So I'm a associate professor of sociology at St. Olaf College. You can see here some affiliated institutions. I'll tell you more about that in a minute. But yeah, so I actually was born in Indiana, and I grew up in Indianapolis and then in Carmel. I made photographs starting in high school that were about two main things. One was kind of about the way that the rural landscape was really vanishing in Hamilton County. And so I was looking around what's going on around me. And so I started making these photographs that were about that and how people were using farms and how farms were turning into neighborhoods and so on. But then I was also making work that was about the hardcore punk scene. And so I was playing in bands and making photographs. And so these are, obviously back on film and so on. This is back in the early 90s. And so we'd use the photographs and like for record labels or for t-shirts or for whatever. But for me, I really always thought about these two things together as being something that might motivate a broader interest in how people connect with place and how those places change in relationship to these huge social forces. And so we can think about like the farms going away, or we can think about these people coming together in this environment and thinking about what are the big factors that are influencing that. And so, since that time period, I've lived most of my life in the Midwest. I've lived in Indiana, Ohio, Illinois, and these days I live in Minnesota. Although I did spend a few years of my childhood in Southern California, and I'm actually speaking to you from there now. So I'm speaking to you from this place where I lived when I was like 10 through 13 or something. Just to give you a sense of some of the other projects that I've been working on over the last several years, I've been looking at projects that are about the future of former coal mining communities in places like France, Belgium, and Luxembourg. So I'm involved with a number of long-term projects there for about 5 years now. I've been working on a project since at least 2012 and maybe 2010 about how political and cultural positions motivate particular kinds of conflicts in Northern Ireland, in particular in Belfast, and the role of these bonfires in kind of claiming place for some people and really excluding others. And I've been working on all sorts of projects that are about what we might think of as the social, political, and economic effects of what we might call deindustrialization, or that movement away from factories being a primary driver of economic development in the United States, combined with things like structural racism and more in places like Chicago. But I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. I want to say, what is sociology? I don't know about you all, but when I was in, middle and then high school, I think there might have been like one sociology course, but I took economics. I don't know. Anyway, sociology was like this stuff that wasn't seen as serious or something. I don't know. Anyway, to this day, I wish I had taken that course. I'm curious what I would have gotten. And so I think about sociology, and I think we can think of sociology as the study of society. And so this means the way that certain groups of people who share really important attributes come together. And so these are attributes like the places people live, institutions like schools and governments, and the kinds of like interpersonal relationships we have just out in the world. And so we can think about this in really big ways. And so thinking about Columbus, which is a major site for people all around the world to come and work at Cummins and a variety of other companies, you think about the way that societies might be expanded in this cross-border dynamic, right? Or we might think about something really narrow, or we can think about what's going on at a particular block. And so this is the kind of stuff that sociologists study. And I'm really an advocate for what we call visual sociology. And so that's particularly particularly as it practiced in what I might call the public sphere. And so I'm not just doing work that is for academia, right? I'm doing work that is also for everybody, right? Like I want projects to be accessible and open rather than just being something that someone reads in a college classroom or some academic reads, whatever, on their own. And so what I end up doing, a lot of that is teaching. These are two photographs of my classroom. One when I had some guests, another one someone made of me. So I teach classes like social theory and race and class and urban sociology, also Black Lives Matter, visual sociology. So I teach all of these kinds of classes working in a small setting. These are both kind of typical size classrooms for the college where I teach, St. Olaf. And I do spend a lot of time kind of like in committee meetings and doing that kind of stuff. But that's, like a classroom and committee is like a big part of what I do. But a lot of what I do, the most of it, I suppose, really is research. And so we can think of this as being like what's happening here. Someone happened to be with me. And so he photographed me while I was actually filming what was going on in this room as part of a 6-year ethnography and film project. And so by ethnography, I mean, this was an opportunity to really spend time with people in a deep and meaningful way in people's homes, with them literally for years to understand what was going on in this place. And I was making a film at the same time. I'll tell you a little bit more about that. And that work really gives me a lot of flexibility. And so, I can publish projects in, major university presses like the University of Chicago Press, but also in all sorts of other things, right? So academic journals, whatever, online zines, all sorts of stuff. But it's not just these kinds of publications that for me, I regularly show work in galleries. And then of course, like here in Columbus, the current installation of Exhibit Columbus, and just had this great opportunity to meet Srikanta through that experience, right? So I'm really happy to be here today through that work, and then finally, there's like all this work that I do that's in these like big film festivals and other kinds of events that are like that. And in order to support that work, I told you I showing what these little logos are about. I get grants from all these institutions. And so these are things like the Driehaus Foundation, the Graham Foundation, the City of Chicago, institutions like the Hyde Park Arts Center in Chicago, the MacArthur Foundation, and something called the Center for Regional Photography, Hauts-de-France in Hauts-de-France in the north of France. So these are institutions that are interested in supporting the work that I do. I'm applying for grants and stuff, and then they give me money to go out and work on projects. And so, combining all of these, grants over the years, I've received $250,000 in grants that help me go out and do this work, right? Sometimes that's paying people to work with me. Sometimes that's to prepare projects. Sometimes that's actually just to support myself. But so I get this kind of funding to support the work that I'm doing beyond what I'm getting paid at the college. And so let me tell you a little bit more about how I'm actually studying this and what I'm actually studying. So as I mentioned, I'm really interested in the relationship between community and place. And for me, a lot of that's particularly in the context of cities and the way that social and economic segregation operate. And so the way that I study that is often this sort of like I said, this ethnographic and qualitative approach with an emphasis on visual work. And so we can think about demolition community as one piece. And so when I started out as a graduate student at the University of Chicago, I was really surprised that even though there are like literally hundreds of buildings demolished every year in the city of Chicago, seemingly no one was really paying attention to that. Like people on their block would be like, hey, that building's gone. But other than that, there was very little public discourse about it. Now, thankfully, that's changed. I like to think in part related to the work that I've been doing. But so back in 2012, I did this project. I started a project looking at all of the buildings, or as many of the buildings as I could, that were demolished in the city of Chicago in that year. And so I was going through city demolition permit records. I was interviewing people. I was making these photo projects. And I think the clearest way to show sort of like the direct consequences of this work is this project that I did a few years later, 4 years later, in fact, in 2016. I went back and I photographed a subsample of what happened to those buildings, right? And so if you can see on the left-hand side, these addresses, I think, most of them have South in their, in their address, right? And the ones here mostly have North. These are all on the South side. These are on the North side. And I don't know if you know anything about Chicago, but Chicago is a city that is tremendously segregated, with the south side of the city being really sort of like racialized, where it's both economic and racial segregation is operating in the city. Whereas on the north side, the other element of that segregation, right? So we're relatively well-to-do, many white people, also Asians, but are living. And so compared to the Latin American and African-American communities that are on the South side. And so if you look at these photographs, you can see really clearly, right, that 4 years later on the South side, if a building got demolished, it stayed demolished, right? On the right side, if a building got demolished, there was something else there. And in fact, the only places where there wasn't something else put in that place, from all of those buildings I went back to rephotograph, was a place where someone had so much money that they bought the house next door just to knock it down to get a better yard. Okay. And so, what I'm trying to do here is really show the way that things like inequality play out in the world, right? And the way that here that these very clear inequities around race and class manifest in the environment. I'll just show you a few other photographs that are related to these kinds of projects. This is part of from a long-term project that started out with this building here. That was, when I was photographing it, there were two buildings with an eyesight of it also being demolished. Basically, that never happens. And so I went back and I started pulling demolition permits. I went back through my archives of buildings that I had photographed, like this one. And I noticed that all this stuff was being demolished in this neighborhood. This is back in 2012. And these buildings like this one here were demolished in 2009. And they were all linked to the same place. And in fact, they were all linked to Norfolk Southern. It's a train company. And they decided they were going to expand this freight yard here into the neighborhood. And so, basically the idea was that they came in and they told the residents of this neighborhood, a nearly 100% African-American community in the city, in the city's south side, to say, like, your neighborhood, one way or another, is going to go away, and we're going to turn it into a freight yard. And so, particularly as this like white guy, and not only a white guy, but a white guy at the University of Chicago, an institution with a really troubled sort of history of sort of like class and racial relationships in the south side of the city, I thought it was important that this is not a project that was mine, right? But it was a project that I would reach out and do with community members. And so the woman who I'm sort of sitting with here, Deborah Payne, is an important community member, a community activist, and she and I partnered to make a film called The Area. So she's a community activist in this neighborhood, and make this film as a tool that not only could I understand what's going on and academics could understand what's going on, but that she could use in order to draw attention to these issues, better understand it, and try to fight so that something like this wouldn't happen in the future. And so you're seeing people moving from, interacting on front porches to now connecting over, social media. And so we made this film. I'm really happy to say that it premiered at a great film festival, and is shown on PBS and the World Channel. And so, we're really trying to get it out there and talk about it. And so I know I'm kind of out of time here, but I just want to spend like 3 more minutes telling you about another project, and then we can do questions. But is this helpful? Yeah? Yeah? Okay, thumbs up. Great. Cool. Well, so, that's a pretty downer project, although Deborah really uses it as a tool. She uses the film as a tool to talk with other community members so that they understand what these kinds of processes are like, and also to kind of help them understand what they might do that maybe she didn't do right. Okay. And so as a sociologist, I write academic papers and do all that kind of stuff about it. But I also have this film out there and I'm playing this additional advocacy role. But this interest in rebuilding is something that's not just a sort of interest of hers, it's a real interest in mine. And so back in 2009, which was 3 years before I started working on the area, it was right in the midst of the last recession. And so there's a historian named Michael Carrier and I started working on a research project that would ultimately become this book that was published by the University of Chicago Press back in April of this year. And what we did was we drew from all of these theorists. We did interviews, we did archival research, we did site visits, we were involved in projects, all of this work In fact, all this work around the country. So we went to more than 40 cities and talked to more than 200 organizations that are doing what we might call do-it-yourself attempts to address local social problems. And so it might be like, for example, on this upper left-hand corner image, there's an artist named Candy Chang who's working in New Orleans. And she was looking around her neighborhood and was really discouraged to see all of these buildings kind of being torn down or being left derelict. And so she started taking over the buildings. In this case, you may have even seen one of these installations because it's now a global phenomenon. These installations have been done all over the world, but this is literally the first one. And so she put up this sign that says, "Before I die." And then she put all these blank lines and people could put what they would want to, what they want to do, right? And so things, it might be silly things like, whatever, go on a date with Brad Pitt, who was actually actively involved with what was going on in New Orleans at the time. Or it might be something like take my mother on an important vacation, develop love. So she was working on projects that were really changing what was going on in her neighborhood and changing it into something else. And so we're looking at all these kinds of projects from really famous ones. Like there's a project called Project Row Houses in Houston, Texas, that was started by this guy right here. Rick Lowe is his name. And he along with some other Black activists and artists, bought from the city of Houston these row houses here. They were going to be demolished. And so they saved them. And what they did is they started turning them into art galleries and then into housing for young single mothers who were below the poverty line. And they started to build out from there. And so the idea is we're highlighting projects like that all over the country. The Sweetwater Foundation's work in Chicago. This is kind of an interesting one because we did it for so long. These are photographs in 2014, 16, and 19. We're able to see groups like Assembly House 150 in Buffalo that started out as this one artist bought this building and thought, I'm not sure what I'm going to do with this, but I'm going to start to talk to community members about what they might want. And people said, we really want a job training program. Well, he's an artist and architect. And so what he did was he now works with the county and all these not-for-profit organizations. And he teaches people how to do skilled trades, things like plumbing, carpentry, electrical work, by doing these amazing art installations in this building. And here you can see this building evolving over time. Right. And I'll kind of wrap up to say that, there are all sorts of other projects. I've been looking internationally. I mentioned these projects in France and Belgium. Here you can see people who are like redefining what it might mean to live in a place that used to be defined by coal mining, to places like the Tohoku region of Japan that are still trying to deal with the aftermath, the 2011 earthquake, tsunami, and radioactive disaster. And there are groups that are doing work in Ishinomaki, Japan. This group on the right here, this guy Chiba is his name. Chiba-san has been, from the very beginning, has been teaching people how to make simple wood furniture, all born out of the idea that after the tsunami happened, all the wooden doors that were at the bottoms of the houses that survived the tsunami swelled because of the water and they wouldn't close anymore. And so he started teaching people how to make things like doors and then how to make simple furniture. And it's now become a real driver of not only sort of creating this product, but also bringing people to Ishinomaki to bring things back. And so anyway, I share all that with you just to kind of say, this is a little bit of what I do, the kinds of outcomes of what I'm doing, the things that I'm interested in. And my hope with all of these projects is that by giving like long range attention to all of these issues, and by participating, that like we can really discover and sort of like amplify the work that people are doing around the world as a way of really supporting this innovative community-based solutions to local issues. And so that's more or less what I do as a sociologist. I'll stop the share here. Yeah, so anyway, that was 20 minutes instead of 15, I'm sorry. But I hope it was at least quasi-interesting. Yeah, do you have any questions or what can I tell you? Yeah, please. Oh yeah, I think you all are muted right now, so.
Hi. There's an echo.
Maybe turn off the speaker while talking and then turn it back on.
We did. Oh, we did? Oh, my, that's just an echo. Okay. Hi. So I'm really into photography, and I was actually considering it as a career, but
Sure.
I think it's rather as a pastime. But recently I've been making like short films or like recordings on my camera, and I would really like how to like share it from the like camera to my phone. Do you know how to do that?
Sure. I mean, so there are all sorts of ways to do that.
I can't hear you.
Oh, okay. Maybe put my, uh, okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, then we got to turn the other mic. Okay, there we go. Cool. Yeah, I mean, there are all sorts of ways to do that, and I could even maybe send you a link to specific articles that might show you how to do that. But the easiest way is just to find a way to do a transfer. If you're working with Macs, with Apple computer devices, like with an iPhone and with a Macintosh. That you can actually use iCloud, or not iCloud, but actually do an AirDrop between them. If you're using Android, it's a different process, but you could absolutely do that. And, I think that's one of the things that, particularly a lot of people who are doing like really professional work or like influencers or whatever on TikTok or Instagram or whatever, right? They're actually shooting that stuff on professional cameras, right? And then porting it into Instagram, and so that's absolutely like a normal thing. And yeah, we could talk more about that if you want. But yeah. And I will say, just as far as like pursuing a career in photography and film, I mean, this is, it can be quite challenging, right? And there are all sorts of pathways to go to it. But I think the most important thing with those kinds of projects is, on one hand, is to start to think about, what are you building towards, right? As a project, right? So like, it could be you're establishing a brand identity, right? It could be that you're focusing on a particular topic, but you want to think about like, what's the body of work that you're building, right? Because you want someone to be able to point back and say like, this is what this person is doing, right? Like this person is working on this kind of thing, and that's what their emphasis is on, right? And once you have that kind of body of work, then it's easy to then start talking to people and say, hey, like, this is the kind of thing that I start to do. And you start to connect with other people, fellow artists, right? It could be funders, it could be a local school or someone else, who might be able to then bridge you beyond your own individual work into sharing that work with others, like not only through, I mean, it could be online, right? But it could also be in person. But I think it's really important to establish that, like, what is that thing that you are doing, and being really clear about that, because that gives people an opportunity to understand how to like make sense of who you are and what your work is. But anyway, lots of other things to think about with that too. But yeah, definitely a challenging field to get into, and one that's really changing, but I think that remains one of the most important elements, is to be really clear about, who you are and what you're doing. Yeah, I think I wish early on I was kind of like doing a scattershot approach where I was doing all sorts of different things. It was very difficult for people to understand, like, who is this guy, what's he doing, and so on.
Right. Just I'm going to try having my computer unmuted here. I think my microphone is good enough to pick up anybody in the room from where you are, and it seems like we're not getting the feedback echoing issue this way.
Cool.
Okay, I have a question. So mine was about how you mentioned a lot about how your sociological work relates to like community solutions to like problems affecting society. How does sociology do you work with other people as well, like other careers? I don't know, maybe in government as well?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And the sociologists take all sorts of different kinds of approaches to doing this kind of work. And we tend to think about a distinction between work that's kind of like academic work, or work that's in academia, versus work that's maybe policy based, right? And then, or practitioner based. And so, the work that I do as a sociologist, as you can see, is a little bit of that sort of traditional research work, but it's also a little bit of the advocacy role. And with that advocacy role, I am absolutely developing partnerships with all different kinds of institutions. And depending on what the project is or what the desired outcome is, I may approach a different way with different kinds of partners. And so, for example, with thinking about the film, a lot of the work that we've been doing with the film has been with community-based organizations. And so these are not-for-profit organizations that are doing work in communities that might be related to schools, it might be related to addressing blight, dereliction and, houses that are falling apart or something. It might be people who are trying to get access to healthy food. But so trying to work with them to figure out how we can bring the story in the film and the experience that Deborah has as an activist to the kind of work that they're doing. Okay, so that's one big piece of it. The other big piece of the work that we're doing with the film is sitting down with city leaders. And so like the Chicago Department of Public Health, the Chicago Department of Housing, other cities' departments of housing, and working with them to say to these people who are hospitals, or another example of people we've sat down with. And so in those cases, it's these bigger level institutions that, as bureaucratic institutions, as these bureaucracies, are trying to figure out how to deal with public health issues, or trying to deal with the way that there are problems in the built environment. And in those cases, then we are having direct conversations with, so what can the hospital do to do better community outreach, right? Or what can the city of Chicago's housing department do to ensure that people don't get evicted from their houses unnecessarily, right? So is there something to put another barrier in? And then I guess finally, then there's this group of politicians, and I put them in a different category from these other kinds of people who are more working on the sort of like programmatic side of making something happen. But so we've sat down with city councilors in places like Chicago, Los Angeles, and Minneapolis. We've sat down and talked to members of the House of Representatives. We've talked to members of the U.S. Senate and talked to them. In that case, those cases, it's more about sort of sharing a story and giving them a better understanding about what things are going on the ground. And so letting people understand what the effects of these kinds of policies are having. And so those, I'd say, are like the three main groups that we've done that kind of work with the film. So community organizations, these sort of bureaucratic institutions, whether they be on a government side or on a not-for-profit side, like a hospital, right? And then elected officials, all which we interact with in different kinds of ways, but are all really important. I guess I'll say that the fourth one here that I've left out is the role of academics in general in this way, right? So I mentioned I'm talking to other academics, but one of the effects of publishing books or by giving presentations is that other academics will come into contact with the work and share it with others, right? So it builds on the research work that's being done about these issues, right? But then can also kind of come back around and indirectly influence the way that policymakers are doing work in this way.
Yeah. You can if you want to, or Mr. Hagner's might be interested in speaking.
Yeah, if you just speak loud enough, the microphone here should pick you up.
So I have a question on how did you find such communities that were that some buildings were getting demolished, like the southern part of Chicago? How did you find these buildings?
Yeah, I'd say two ways. I mean, so first off, I lived on the south side of Chicago at the time. In fact, I lived there for 16 years. And the area that was being demolished in the film, if we're going to focus on that piece, was only about 3 miles from my house. Okay. Now, I want to say that where I lived in a neighborhood called Hyde Park, where the University of Chicago is in many ways a world away from Inglewood, the neighborhood where this happened. And it wouldn't be typical for someone who lived in Hyde Park to necessarily be good friends with someone who lived in Inglewood, okay? And so for me, there were two things that brought me into it, right? And this is because of racial boundaries, because of class boundaries, cultural boundaries, right, that exist. But so there are two ways that I kind of came into contact with it. One was because as a sociologist, there's someone who's just interested in the city. I had gotten out and I'd gotten to know people in all sorts of neighborhoods around the city, right? I don't know everyone everywhere, right? But I know people who are particularly those who are engaged in community development work, in lots of community activists. I know those people in lots of different neighborhoods around the city. And so I would show up and I might volunteer with work that they were doing, right? Or we might find a way that we could have a conversation about something. And so that was already there. And so I was already spending time in the neighborhood of Englewood, right? Working on other kinds of projects with people who live there. But the other piece of it was something that I think maybe I didn't do a good enough job of explaining, which was when I was working on these projects about demolition all over the city. One of the things I would do is I would get from the city of Chicago a list of all of the permits that are issued for a demolition. And so in the city of Chicago, if you want to demolish a building, you actually have to apply to the city of Chicago to allow that building to be knocked down, okay? Now, there are times the city's actually going to knock your house down if you don't maintain it or something, but that's a different story, okay? But no matter what, there has to be a building permit issue. And so what I would do is I would, every day, I would wake up in the morning and I would look and see where were demolition permits issued in that city, in the city that day. And because I had grant support to work on this project, and I was a graduate student and had a lot of flexibility with my time, I would then go out into the city, not every day, but let's say every 3 days or something. And I would go to those places and photograph them. And so in this way, I was just out there all the time. And so the story I was telling you about this one house, and I could see these other ones being demolished, right? That was such a crazy thing because it's so concentrated, right? But I was there because of that permit. And to go back to what I was saying about like not knowing people there, one of the interesting things was, even though I knew activists who were involved in that community, and in fact, other scholars who were doing work in that community, that because there was no public announcement of this project, it was really unclear to everyone what was actually happening. And because hundreds of buildings get demolished in the city every year, right? It took a while to figure out why this was going on, right? And so even the activists I knew in the city didn't necessarily know why buildings were coming down or that there was some special reason for it. And so in that way, I think, using the tools as a sociologist and also just as a human being where like, having connections with people really helps, but then also doing this other kind of more data-driven work is really essential too. So I think it's important to pair both of them. And so I was saying at the beginning, I do work that's kind of both qualitative and quantitative. I think it's important that you're doing both.
You mentioned your film, The Area. I was just curious, is that streaming on any platform? Is there any way to actually be able to view that? You mentioned PBS.
Yeah, so I can make it available to you all. Right now, it's not available. So we have a distribution agreement with PBS, and they have without getting into the details, there's certain times where they have exclusive ability to broadcast it, right? And other people can't show it yet, right? And so we're still in that window. So it was online for 3 months, and now and then it was offline. It was on for a month, and right now it's in this offline period. But I think I should be able to make it available to you all if you like. It would just be a private screening link I could share.
Okay. Those are be like a scheduled thing that you would be able to make available, or?
Well, so I could give you something that would be like have a time horizon. It would have a password would be associated with it.
Okay.
I think you could watch it that way. Yeah. Other questions? And we don't have to talk about like my work either, right? I can tell you more about what it's like to be a professor. I can tell you more about, anything, right? Photographer, filmmaker. I did work in digital media for a long time. I can talk about that too. But anyway, I'm happy to talk about whatever's useful to you all.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask, how did you get into sociology or this kind of work?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, part of it really goes back to that second slide I showed you, the first real slide I showed you, where, all these houses are falling apart around me, right? And these farmhouses and so on, right? And at the same time, I'm part of this really kind of engaged kind of counterculture, right? This sub scene. And so that's part of it. The other part of it was just, I think I wouldn't be a good sociologist if I didn't also share that, when I moved back from California to Indiana, there was like a rupture that happened, right? Where I literally moved back to the same place that I had lived in before, but my friends from when I was in second grade were not the same as when they were in second grade because they were in sixth grade, right? And I had a bunch of really different experiences in Southern California that they didn't have, right? And so all of a sudden I had gone from, like a particular kind of school and particular kinds of relationships and like, I was like surfing and I was skateboarding and all that stuff. But like back in Indiana, back then, skateboarding was really weird, right? Like I was marginalized, right? For doing something that was totally normal where I had been growing up, right? But it was really weird to do in Indiana at the time, right? And so I was having these kinds of like experiences that I think made me step a little bit outside of, just sort of like, whatever daily life and reflect on, well, so why is it that like it's so weird to be a skateboarder in Indiana, but it's totally normal in California, right? And so, that got me interested in reading. I've got, got really interested in, like utopian or sort of dystopian books by like George Orwell and Aldous Huxley and maybe some other kinds of books by people like John Steinbeck and others who are looking at social problems in the United States and trying to understand them. So this is kind of canon stuff, right? Not contemporary literature, but old literature. And that set me, I think, on this direction of saying, not only do I want to kind of understand it, right? And understand it like in a personal way, but I want to understand it in a way that's bigger than that, because I want to understand how we might be able to change something. Yeah. And then I guess sociology specifically, right? So in college, I went to a place called another liberal arts school called Kenyon College, which is in Ohio. And it's another small liberal arts school. And I designed my own major. And so I created a major in what I called social and political economy. And so it was combining sociology, political science, and economics, right? With a minor in public policy. And so when I got out of college, I was thinking, I really like this professor thing. I like the kind of work that they're doing. It seems like the kind of life that I like, and it can let me connect in a bunch of different ways. And so I started talking to people who were in these different fields of economics, political science, and sociology. And as you can tell, my work is really broad, right? Like I like to work with cameras. I like to work with, with people, but I've also done quantitative work. And I asked people, well, so where do you think I would best fit in? And they thought that sociology or anthropology would be fields where I would find a home. Anthropology doesn't have as much of an emphasis on quantitative work, and I wanted to be able to do that kind of quantitative work. And so ultimately, I ended up deciding to go for sociology, even though as an undergrad, I was studying political science, economics, and sociology, along with all the other things that you study in college. So that's what led me down this path. Yeah.
Okay, I just have like a last question that combines the two, I guess. So one thing is you talk about quantitative like analysis that you do. So what portion is quantitative? Like what kind of data do you collect? And then the second question was about just like life as a professor, like overall, how much time do you have for other things, and like what are the different things you work on in a day?
Yeah, sure. That's again, also more great questions. So I didn't tell you that much about the quantitative piece of what I'm doing because it's not as public, and it's maybe a little more directed towards what's going on in academia. But I'll give you one example. That's not from the projects that I've talked about, but a different set of projects. So for 6 years, I worked for an organization called the Consortium on Chicago School Research. And now I think it's actually called the Chicago Consortium on School Research. Okay. And what it is it's a research group that's based at the University of Chicago that is led by faculty and has a bunch of PhD level scholars who are doing research on school reform. And they're basically trying to figure out how can we make programs. The thing that I was interested in studying there was how can we make programs connect with people who might otherwise not do well in high school. right? So people who have something going on in their lives, it's making it very difficult for them to really get through high school. And so what we would do is we did these massive surveys. We literally surveyed every student in the Chicago public school system, which is a big system, okay? And the organization has been doing it since 88, I think. And so what I would do is I would run statistical models using a technique called hierarchical linear modeling. And what it would let us do is it would let us say, we could look at the effect of a certain reform on a student, but also understand that student's relationship with their classroom and their school. And so we could see what was the effect of this student's own work, the effect of this classroom's effect on that student's work, and the effect of the school's effect on both the classroom and the student, if you're following me, right? So how much it made a difference for each of these things. And so that's the kind of work that I would do. So I was working these massive data sets with more than 1 million records over the course of literally decades. And so that's some of the work that I would do. Some of the other work that I do may be much smaller these days, where I'm interested in looking at like, what are the typical kinds of calls that someone might give to 311 or the non-emergency helpline that a lot of cities have. And so, might look through and try to understand that in some sort of basic way and run some associations between what's going on in a neighborhood and, with, let's say, crime rates, for example, and what's happening with the non-emergency calls that the city is giving. Okay. Then, as far as like my daily life, I'd say it looks like it really varies, right? So I teach, I tend to teach either 2 or 3 days a week during the school year, okay? So we have a semester-based system. We also have what's known as a J term or an interim term, which is a little different from the other two. But so in the semesters, I'll teach either 2 or 3 days, and I'll teach 2 or 3 classes those days, okay? Then in interim, it's different because I'm teaching every day for that same class for 2 hours, okay? But what that means is I basically am spending, let's say, the morning teaching classes. Then I spend another, let's say, hour and a half in what we call office hours, right? Where I'm just sitting in my office. Students can either sign up to meet with me or they can just drop by and talk to me about what's going on, do that kind of work. And then on those same days when I'm on campus, I often may also have like a committee meeting. So I was for a couple of years on something known as the Faculty Governance Committee. And so what that was is it's an organization where, you may or may not know this, but colleges often have the faculty play a role in running the college, okay? At some colleges, they have a lot of power. At others, they have very little power. At ours, it's maybe in between. And so I was on a committee whose role it was to try to understand what the rules were for faculty to follow and how to change those rules if we felt like they were out of, kind of order with what we might think should be happening. And so that would be a day, right? So I would spend, and maybe I'd get home by 3 or 4 o'clock or something, at which point I've probably got to do either some grading or some preparation, right, for the class that's going to happen in a day or two. So there's a lot of that. My guess is it's probably not so different from your teacher's experience, although with a slightly different schedule, right? So in a sense that your time in the classroom, right, is only a small part of the actual work that you're doing, that involves with teaching. You're doing lesson preparation, you're doing grading, you're answering student emails, and so on, right? Okay. But there's a lot of other stuff too, because a professor's job is really defined as being part in the classroom, part in community, part in the sort of like this kind of committee work, and in part doing research. The college makes sure that I also have time to do research. And so I'll spend, I'd say at least like a day and a half a week working on these research projects. And then good chunks of the summer. And then also I teach every other interim. So I have a January where I might be teaching every day, right? Or I might have a January where I'm not teaching at all. And so in that case, I'm only working on research during that time. So I guess the big takeaway is there are a lot of demands on my time, but it's really flexible. And the schedule is, for the most part, up to me beyond when we have my class times, right? And even those, in a sense, I can kind of define. one of the things that I really liked about a career in academia was that I liked the flexibility that it afforded. I wanted to be able to teach and be in the classroom and have these kinds of conversations with college students, right? And others, right? With you all here, I'm able to do that. But then I also really thought that research was going to be an important part of my work. And I was looking for a job that would allow me to then connect and make that research be part of the job. And then I'll say the one last thing, and this is the kind of like the amazing thing about if you can get at what's known as a tenured job as a faculty member, right? So if you are at a school and you're lucky enough to get a tenure track position, basically what it means is you kind of have, once you get tenure, so you go through the process, they make sure that your teaching is good, that your research is really good, your commitment to the college is strong, that after about 6 or 7 years, you go up for review. And when you do that, you can effectively be like employed for life, right? It's not quite that strong, but the idea is that you are making a commitment to that institution and they're making a commitment to you. You could always leave if you wanted, but it'd be very difficult for them to fire you. Probably not as easy it is for as a like a union worker to be protected from being firing, but still it's hard. So I am actually now, so I'm tenured and I'm on sabbatical this year. And so I am literally not teaching any classes at all this year. And the reason I'm able to be in California right now is that, well, my wife can work remotely and I'm working on a research project that's here. And so I am, just like hanging out in California. Earlier this year, and in fact, I think while we were emailing, I was in Luxembourg and in France working on one of these projects. So I was working with a team at the University of Luxembourg on doing interviews, making photographs, doing audio work, working on a project in Luxembourg for a month, working on this sort of like long-term project. So anyway, that's one of the amazing things about academia is this, like, if you can get it, the sabbatical year is just like totally amazing. And that you're able to then focus on your scholarship. And the idea being that that means that your teaching is going to be better, right? Your scholarship's going to be better. You're going to be able to make, more significant work for your students and others because you are meaningfully connected in scholarship in the world. And so that's why they allow us to do that. Anyway, to me, it's, it's kind of like, I can't believe, I got this job. But it took a long time.
Wrap-up questions, do you ask me what you can do? No, okay. I think, Mr. Hyman, do you have any questions too?
I just had one kind of like a joke throwaway question, but have you ever met Bill Watterson?
I wish. No. So Bill Watterson famously went to Kenyon College, but no, I never met him.
Okay.
But the lore was strong on campus. I have gotten a chance to meet some other cool Kenyon alums, but not him. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just reading about that. I saw his name and Allison Janney, and there's one other person I recognize, so I don't remember.
Josh Radner. Trying to think who else. What's his name? Huge actor from Days Gone By. Paul Newman. Trying to think who else might be some good examples of some famous Kenyon alums. One of the things that's really nice about Kenyon is it has a strong writing program. And one of the people who actually you all will know is who went to Kenyon, who was in my year, although he ended up graduating a year later than me, was John Green. And so John Green from The Fault in Our Stars and so on, right? So also from Indiana, right? And then went to Kenyon. And I would not say we were great friends in college, but we were good friends in college and have gotten a chance to talk together a couple of times. There was a TEDx Indy that happened a few years ago that we got a chance to talk on the same panel, and it was super fun. But anyway, some Kenyon folks. Yeah, John Green's probably the most, the biggest one these days.
I think
Anything else? Anything I can tell you? Photography, sociology, academia? I don't know, anything. If you haven't gotten a chance to get out and see some of the, the Exhibit Columbus installations, you could actually see one of your classmates here, right? Pictured, and also see all sorts of amazing other work. I think it's up for maybe another week. I'm not sure. But yeah, so you can see my photos around the city, along with photographs by a New Orleans-based photographer named Jenny Hanushek. So she does great work. So she was kind of working in the southern part of the Mississippi watershed. I was working kind of everywhere else. During the last year, making projects. But then there are all these amazing architectural innovations and installations that are all over the city. I'm sure you've seen some of them, but anyway, it was really fun to get a chance to work on the project and then give me a reason to actually get a chance to sit down and meet some of you. So anyway, to me, it's like, that also tells you like, like if you have like engaged people, you're friendly and interested in connecting with people, right? Like just see where things go. Like I love that project has led us to this moment sitting here. It makes me really happy, and I'm thankful for the invitation. Thank you, Supada.
Thank you, Dr. Schalliol. This is really interesting. We really tied together a lot of different things I'm interested in personally. So that's cool. Yeah, I'll definitely be exploring like some of the things that you talked about today.
Sure, and any of you, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to, share a little bit more with you. Of course, it's just my perspective. I'm just some guy, right? But I'm happy to, to give you my take on something if you like, as you're thinking about your future. So easy to find me. I think I'm pretty much the only David Schalliol. There might be another one out there, but anyway, go find me. It's easy. I'm the most findable one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
So every time before we leave, we kind of take a picture. So all you have to do is just like stay on screen. But is that all right?
Sure.
Okay.